Hello, AP World History students. We got a lesson here about a famous topic today of the Italian Renaissance and the scientific revolution that began in Europe here at the start of period 2. So we're going to launch off on 1450 to 1750 by talking about this major change that Europe was undergoing. And so let's just jump right in. The Renaissance means a rebirth. And what's being reborn? Well, on some level, you could say not that much. The Renaissance, truth be told, can be a little bit oversold in certain ways because it was a movement, in certain ways by, of, and for the rich. And it's a movement that's sort of for the upper crust, the upper classes of Europe are sort of celebrating this and experiencing this. And for most folks, human beings who were alive in Western Europe at this time, if you said, isn't it wonderful to be alive during the Italian Renaissance? They'd say, during the what now? What's happening? It's not really a thing. At the same time, the learning, the attitudes, the art are shifting, and what that is, that those shifts are following and tied to shifts in values, shifts in ideas. And those shifts are going to be really transformative in general for world culture, especially as Renaissance curiosity and Renaissance materialism and humanism sort of causes Europeans to become ever more serious about branching out and expanding and exploring. So we're going to watch the processes that we see here be a part of the larger global picture. Okay, so let's just jump right in and talk about what this was. It started in Italy. We call it the Italian Renaissance to, clarify it or to separate it from other sort of cultural flowering moments in European history. Why Europe? Why did it start there? Well, there's a bunch of good reasons for that. Europe is, at this stage, Europe is fairly wealthy because trade had been expanding for some time as we learned trade to the Middle East. And so Italy is in a prime position in the Mediterranean to benefit from that trade. And so Italian merchants had been trading with Constantinople and had been trading with Muslim traders on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. Italy is broken into these city-states that were hotly competitive with each other. So famous ones like Venice and Florence and Milan. And these city-states were ruled by an oligarchy. They're ruled by these elite. The most famous is the Medici family that controlled Florence. And look, in certain ways, this is like they controlled these cities like a mafia family. Not to sort of get into like weird Italian stereotypes here, but they were sort of these powerful elite families that controlled those governments. Those families were in partnership with the church. Of course, the Catholic Church is a major institutional player across Europe, but especially in Italy. The Catholic Church is the wealthiest institution in the world, in Europe, I should say. Catholic Church is the most important patron of the arts in Europe, and that is located in Italy. One of the ways that these oligarchical families competed against each other was for who could have the grandest city, who could have the grandest architecture and art, or books, that they had patronized, all these sorts of things. So Italy had wealth, it had competition, it had people who were interested in patronizing the arts and who were sort of behind a lot of these new ideas that are coming into shape. And so that's, those are the reasons we point to why Italy. What are those new ideas? What are the new, values of Western Europe that are starting to shape this culture? Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. I'm going to give you two. I mean, someone could maybe branch this into more or say, really there's just one big change. But I'm going to give us two values that become, the characteristic values of Western culture. All right. And the first is individualism. And I really can't overemphasize the importance of individualism in Western thinking. All of you as American boys and girls have grown up marinated, just totally soaked in individualism. And so in a certain sense, it's almost hard to imagine what it would be like to conceive of the world in a non-individualistic way. But let's talk about what this means. Individualism, the value of individualism just says we conceive of reality, we conceive of the world, we conceive of the life, of just life itself, starting with the individual. Not starting with the group, and then what is my role as an individual to find within that group, but starting as an individual. An individual, created specially by God. An individual that has particular aptitudes and weaknesses. An individual that has particular passions, an individual that has particular dreams and aspirations. And so part of life is for you as an individual to fully find realization of yourself as an individual, to flourish as an individual. That is a key purpose of life. And so all of us are sort of like, in school, we're all in these pursuits as individuals. And I know I might say sometimes like, this is because we are needed, society needs us to be blah, 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 blah. But so often it's like, so we can sort of take these brains and these bodies we have and maximize full potential out of them, right? That's an individualistic understanding of what we're doing here in school. And if you contrast that with Confucianism, which just says society, life, the conception of life begins at society, and society is a functioning machine, and our role is to find our place within that machine and play that out, right? Or even medieval thinking, which is really bound up in Christian notion of God's goodness and man's weakness, right? Man's sort of failing or being racked with sin, and so. Like things are just sort of, there's just a greater sense of optimism, positivity, or purpose that starts when you begin with describing life, starting with you as the individual. And so in the Renaissance, there's all sorts of heroes of the Renaissance, famous people like Leonardo or Galileo. And the fact that we know their names and in their days they were celebrated as like an individual genius is just an example of like individualism as a value emerging and saying that person, that guy, that artist, that innovator, that is a remarkable thing. Like look at what that person did. Certainly, any number of all of these European explorers we're going to learn about, all of those guys are motivated by this desire to like put their name into history. Another value that's really closely tied with this is the value of humanism. And the value of humanism is just the idea that the world and nature, creation itself, is worth studying in and of itself. The world, human society are worth considering and understanding and pursuing in and of themselves, rather than a kind of a medieval thinking that the only truly noble pursuit is religious or is spiritual, and everything else is so cracked, so broken, so decrepit that it's not a worthwhile endeavor to sort of understand those things, right? So humanism just says, to study the natural world is a good thing to do. To be interested in the flourishing of the natural world is good. To be interested in the flourishing of society in and of itself is good. All studies do not need to be religious. Religious studies are not the only studies that are worthwhile. And by the way, that particular perspective isn't uniquely Christian. We're going to actually look later on at at parts of the Muslim world that get sort of caught into this sort of becoming less humanistic and more sort of exclusively religious in their domain and their mode of study. But the opposite is happening in Christian Europe at this point. Even we think about our work at Southwest Christian High School. Southwest Christian High School is a Christian humanistic school, right? Think of how many things you study during the school day, including our class. That's basically a humanistic area of study. We certainly explore what does God have to say about this and how is this all part of God's story. But we're interested in the human story in and of itself because we believe that story in and of itself has value, has meaning, has significance. So, and the other thing is, humanism just says that living your life to benefit the world here and now is a good thing to do. And so building schools or building libraries or building even just grand works of art or architecture that make the world in some way better, well, that's a good thing to do. Also, a humanist pursuit would be to get yourself a boat or to just whatever, play video games, just the things that sort of have no broader religious significance. It's just sort of like, hey, live life and enjoy life here and now while you can, right? And so I also want to be clear, it is not the case at all that Renaissance Europe is secular or atheist or anything like this. What it is it's becoming humanist, right? Europe is still operating, like it says, from this fundamentally Christian perspective. The church is still the most significant patron of the arts, and most of the most famous works of art in the Renaissance are religious, but there are just increasingly humanistic themes woven in, right? So individualism, the sort of understanding of the world that begins with the self and the full realization of self. Humanism, the understanding that like religious pursuits are not the only worthwhile pursuits, and pursuits that benefit the world here and now and like creation as we see it. These are good things to do, and these are worthwhile and interesting areas of study. These are the new values of the Renaissance age that are going to really come to shape, they're just going to come to shape Western society. An extra credit opportunity I want to offer you for over our weekend by the next time we meet in person. I would love it if you could contribute, email me a Renaissance selfie. So, today we're taking pictures of ourselves, right? And so I want you to take a picture of yourself, make it a selfie, but make it about the full flourishing of you and all of your humanistic interests and achievements, right? Whatever that is. Sort of like this guy in this picture here, this portrait, where he's sort of sitting there and he's got his hand in his book like, oh, you've interrupted me. I'm going to keep my finger in the page I was reading because I just happen to be a learned man who's interested in scholarly activity, and I'm also wearing my best outfit today, right? So whatever that is, some sort of Renaissance selfie that demonstrates the values of humanism and individualism, these will be shown to the class. So don't send in anything that you don't want seen by everybody. So send it in, and you can get some extra credit points that way. Okay, artwork is the most famous expression of the Renaissance. And it's what people really remember there. So we're going to talk about some famous examples of Renaissance art. Renaissance art is still primarily religious, and again, that's because I shouldn't say primary. It's still largely religious. The church is the biggest patron of the arts. So this famous image here of the Sistine Chapel, right? And the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel that Michelangelo painted. This is different images and scenes from the Bible, but what do you know? He did sort of work in humanistic themes into there. The other themes that are very common are celebration of the classics, right? Sort of a rebirth, a renewal of the learning and ideas and culture of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which is, of course, another major theme or trend in the Renaissance. Also, we see during this period of time that there's a lot more individual portraits being made, which again reflects the value of individualism. We even know who made this artwork, in a sense, because artists began to sort of sign or make known who made what pieces of art, and they wanted themselves to be remembered in association with their work, which is individualism and humanism. Okay, so we're going to explore all this together. Here in The Last Supper by Leonardo, we're not going to do an in-depth study, but I'll just note the use of the use of geometry to create depth. And of course, all of this geometry, all of these vectors here are pointing to the figure of Christ at the center. And Leonardo, Leonardo famously, you might know the story, he's experimenting with different novel types of paint. And so this is just sort of an experiment, a humanistic experimentation. He's using mathematics here, all to heighten a religious story, a deeply emotional religious story of Jesus the moment that he says he's going to be baptized. The Pieta by Michelangelo is just an astounding sculpture, and we'll just note the return to sort of classical realism in this style, the sort of the nod to the Greeks and the Romans, but again a Christian image, a Christian theme of Mary holding the dead body of Jesus. Just note the draping of the fabric. Just the skill of Michelangelo's work is incredible. So Michelangelo, as a painter, as a sculptor, as an architect, like it's all these things, a Renaissance man, that term, a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman, I suppose, is someone who shows genius in multiple fields. Michelangelo definitely did that. And we'll also note Michelangelo, after this was done, went back and carved his name into the sash on Mary because he wanted to be remembered as the artist. Now, he actually said later that he regretted doing that, but that's an example of individualism there. Like, I want my name. I want to be remembered as the person who created this. Renaissance architecture, again, calls back to, we see the Greeks with the columns, the Romans with the dome, sort of symmetry, strength. Like, it's calling back to the European greatness, or the greatness from the continent of Europe from the classical age. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence was the largest dome ever built in Western Europe up to that point. Again, just sort of like we're starting to see real remarkable art and accomplishment coming out of Western Europe during this Renaissance period. Okay, one or two last pieces. A piece of technological innovation is also coming out of these humanistic pursuits. Gutenberg's printing press is an invention that has just such spectacularly far-reaching effects. So Gutenberg is operating out of what is today Germany. He invents the movable printing press, where you can sort of you can make printed pages, but you don't have to sort of take one big whole wood block and carve the whole page in reverse in wood block and make a stamp and then do it that way. Now there's these sort of, it's like 3D Scrabble pieces where you can sort of take all the letters and pop them in place, and within a minute or two you can have a page of printing ready to go, and then you stamp it and you can print up as many pages of that as you would like. Now, we recall from a video we watched earlier this year that the Chinese and Koreans had developed something like this earlier on. Gutenberg did not know about that. Gutenberg did develop his printing press in isolation. Right, so it's not like he copied or plagiarized. He legit invented that. The Chinese and Korean one was mechanically invented, but it was just sort of culturally less useful because of how different the Chinese language worked, where there's, over 5,000 characters in the Chinese language, and so it's just really unwieldy. You remember that Chinese typewriter, which was this enormously complex device. So like, it's just unwieldy when there's that many characters, whereas in the alphabet we use, where there's 26 plus upper and lowercase, a few pieces like that, like it's much simpler, and it takes this printing press gadget and gives it an explosive effect. And the explosive effect is now you can take knowledge and you can reproduce it and you can spread it faster than anyone can stop it. And so the forces of, conservatism, you could say, like governments or the church in Europe, are really going to struggle to stop or slow down certain ideas that we're going to learn about in our next lesson about the Protestant Reformation. Last piece for today, and that just has to do with the scientific revolution. And so this is another remarkable change, an epistemological change, a change in knowledge. All right. So, what do I mean, a change in knowledge? I just mean, if you make a claim, whatever that claim is, how do you justify that claim? If you make a claim about the world, about reality, about the natural world, about how the human body works, how do you justify it? How do you say, I know because? Previous models in Europe would say, I know because, certainly, I know because that's what's in the Bible, right? Because I read it in the Bible. Or I know because that is what the church has taught. Like the famous thing about like the earth being at the center of the universe. That's not something that's necessarily in the Bible, but that's like a church teaching. The church had taught that, and mainly the church taught that because this Greek astronomer named Ptolemy had taught that. Okay, fine. So because that had been a big institution, a big powerful institution says so, and that's why. Or you could say, because it seems that way, or because it fits within this broader story. That's why I know, or I feel that. It's true, and it's true because I feel that way. The change that's happening here is I make a claim, again, about the natural world, the human body, whatever, about philosophy, and I say, this is true because I can demonstrate it, right? It's true because I can demonstrate it, and then I can reproduce it, right? I can produce data I can experiment and I can produce data, or I can sort of using the inexorable logic of mathematics, I can demonstrate that this is the case. And then you and I can have a debate and argument about that evidence, rather than arguing about that institution or that tradition or that piece of scripture or about how I'm feeling, right? That's a model of knowing, a way of knowing that's going to, it's called empiricism and rationalism, and it's going to lead to the scientific revolution. And we to oversimplify, I'm going to give us two names, two evidence points, two people who are really at the center of this shift. The first is a man from Poland named Copernicus, Nicholas Copernicus. Now, Copernicus is a mathematician and a priest. How about that combination, right? And he studied the heavens, right? Another one of these Renaissance men. And his proposal is that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, that the sun is at the center of the solar system. And his proof for that is primarily mathematical. All right, he's using geometry and mathematics to say, these models, this model makes mathematics, if we put the sun at the center, right, and then the Earth and the moon here, and the other planets there, then I can make mathematical sense of why they appear in the stars, in the heavens, and the places and times that they do. Now, he recognizes this is going to lay me some hot water, so he writes everything and then publishes it only when he's on his deathbed. Then it sort of is released, and it is a majorly controversial issue, right? Because it challenges the church's teachings, which also challenged the teachings and the ideas of the ancients, of the classical world. And Copernicus is just saying, no, this makes more sense, right? We can provide more data if we put the sun at the center of the solar system. Galileo, out of Italy, confirms Copernicus's findings. And Galileo doesn't do it mathematically, rationally. He does it empirically by saying, here, looky here in this telescope, right? The study of lenses is relatively new. And so he's building his own telescopes to study the moon and study like what the appearance of the moon is and what it looks like up close. But he's also noting, as he studies Jupiter, he says, uh-oh, looky here, Jupiter has moons, and we can observe those moons rotating around Jupiter. And if there's moons rotating around Jupiter, then everything does not rotate around the Earth, right? I hate to break it to you. And so Galileo is demonstrating the Copernican understanding of the universe by, again, not just mathematically, by saying, I want you to look and observe with your own eyes what I'm seeing here. And that's how I know this. And he faces all kinds of church pressure, and he's placed under house arrest. And eventually he says, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. The Earth is at the center of everything, and I shouldn't have said that before. And he does this begrudgingly, right? But still, like the way that he sort of backs up Copernicus with empirical data, we just say, we're looking at science here. We're looking at like the birth of modern science happening right there. I'll just also note that Galileo, as frustrated as he might have been with the church, he and Copernicus were believing Christians, and Galileo saw zero contradiction in this, because there isn't any contradiction in it, but he's saying God is no less excellently revealed in nature's actions than in the sacred statements of the Bible, right? And I love that idea, like God is revealed here primarily. But you know what? He's also revealed when you look in that telescope. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen, and he's like, I understand more about God's revelation by studying the world around me, and I don't hold these two things in conflict with each other. Okay, anyway, having said all that, we're at the end of our lesson. Here's my little treat for those of you who hung around to the very end of class today. And there is a reading check that's due the next time we're back together in person. It's just this one, page 463 to 471. Also, don't forget about that extra credit opportunity. Thank you guys so much. I look forward to seeing those selfies from some of you, and have a great day.